I was 60 years old, standing in my son's lavish housewarming party, overflowing with pride. Everyone said he was a financial genius, a man who had turned smart investments into a fortune before 35. Then my wife suddenly grabbed my arm, her face drained of color. "We need to leave, right now." I froze. "Why? What's going on?" She didn't answer until we reached the car. With trembling hands, she opened her phone and whispered, "Didn't you see it?" I frowned. "See what?" When I looked at the photo she had taken upstairs, my heart nearly stopped beating. If you made it this far, thank you more than you know. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? That one detail means the world to me. This story contains fictional elements woven in for depth and educational value. Names and locations are not drawn from specific individuals, but the lesson underneath all of it is completely worth your time. 4 weeks before I sat in that federal courtroom in Fort Myers, watching a bailiff place his hands on my son's shoulders, I was standing in Garrett's driveway on Port Royal Drive, telling myself I had never been prouder of anything in my life. Port Royal is the kind of neighborhood that makes you slow down when you drive through it, even if you have no business being there. The houses sit back from the road behind iron gates, and rows of mature royal palms lit up at night, like something from a television show about people who have solved all their problems. Garrett's house and I still had trouble thinking of it as his house, even after he had walked us through every room twice, was at the end of a curved private drive, 3 stories of white stucco and glass facing a canal that opened out toward the Gulf. I had looked up the property records 2 months earlier, the way a father does when he is trying to decide whether to feel proud or worried. The listing price had been $4,200,000. Garrett was 33 years old and ran a financial investment firm he had founded 4 years ago. I told myself it was possible. I told myself I had raised a brilliant son. Carolyn squeezed my arm as we walked toward the front entrance, her heels clicking on the imported stone pavers. She was wearing the blue dress she saved for occasions she wanted to remember, and her silver hair was pinned back the way she wore it when she was trying to look composed. She had been quieter than usual on the drive over, which I had attributed to the traffic on US 41. "It's something, isn't it?" she said, and her voice carried something I could not quite name. Not quite admiration, not quite unease, but something hovering in the space between the two. "It really is," I said. The front door opened before we reached it, and there was Garrett, tanned and broad-shouldered in a charcoal linen jacket, his dark hair swept back, grinning, the way he used to grin when he was 8 years old and had just done something he wanted applause for. "Dad." He pulled me into a handshake that became a half hug, the kind men do when they are not sure how much warmth the moment calls for. "Mom, you look incredible." Carolyn laughed and let him kiss her cheek. "You say that every time." "Because it's true every time." The foyer alone was larger than the living room of the house where I had raised him. A chandelier the size of a small car hung overhead, casting warm light across a marble floor. Somewhere deeper inside the house, a jazz quartet was playing something low and elegant. The smell of catered food drifted through from the back terrace, something with citrus and garlic and money. There were at least 80 people inside. Vivian appeared from the direction of the kitchen, moving through the crowd with the kind of effortless precision that I had always found slightly unnerving. She was Garrett's wife of 2 years, 31 years old, dark-haired with sharp green eyes that had a way of taking inventory of a room in the time it took most people to say hello. She was dressed in a deep burgundy gown that made everyone around her look like they were wearing the wrong thing. "Warren." She kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and faint. "We're so glad you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She smiled, and her eyes moved past me to Carolyn and then back across the room toward Garrett, and the whole exchange lasted perhaps 4 seconds. I had learned in 2 years of being her father-in-law that Vivian processed information the way a surgeon operates, quickly, cleanly, without visible emotion. Garrett steered us toward the back terrace where the real party was happening. A bartender in a white jacket was working a marble-topped outdoor bar. Beyond the terrace, the canal shimmered under string lights, a small motorboat tied to the private dock. The catering staff moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and small plates of food that looked too beautiful to eat. Garrett. A heavy-set man in his early 50s appeared at my son's elbow, clapping him on the shoulder with the enthusiasm of someone who had already had 2 glasses of champagne. "Absolutely stunning place, son. Absolutely stunning." "Howard Beale," the man said, turning to me and extending a hand. Howard was Garrett's next-door neighbor on Port Royal Drive, a retired commercial real estate developer from Atlanta who had relocated to Naples 7 years ago. He had the handshake of a man who had made his money the old-fashioned way and wanted you to feel it. You must be the father, the famous Warren Holt. If famous might be generous, I said. Howard laughed and pointed a finger at me. Your boy talks about you constantly, says everything he knows about numbers he learned from you. He lowered his voice with the conspiratorial warmth of a man sharing a compliment. Real credit to you, Warren, real credit. I thanked him. I watched Garrett across the terrace holding court in front of a semicircle of guests, his hands moving as he talked, his voice rising and falling, with the cadence of a man who had learned that confidence is its own form of currency. I caught fragments of what he was saying, algorithmic positioning, asymmetric return profiles the next 18 months in digital asset markets. My chest tightened in a way I could not immediately explain. I had spent 35 years as a certified public accountant in Naples, building a practice one client at a time, driving a sensible car, coaching Garrett's Little League team on Saturday mornings. I knew what real money looked like when it was built honestly. It looked like patience. It looked like boring decisions made carefully over a long time. $4 million houses at 33 did not look like patience. I pushed the thought away. I had pushed that same thought away 7 or 8 times in the past year, each time Garrett mentioned a new acquisition or a new round of investor interest. I was a 60-year-old man from a generation that distrusted its own doubts, and Garrett was my son, and I did not want to be the kind of father who poisoned his own pride with suspicion. Carolyn had drifted away from my side somewhere between the terrace and the indoor dining room. I assumed she had found someone she knew. I stayed on the terrace with Howard, half listening to his opinions about Gulf front property values. My eyes following Garrett as he moved from one cluster of guests to another, always at the center, always performing. It was 30 minutes later when I noticed Carolyn had not come back. I found her by the front staircase standing very still, with one hand pressed flat against the wall, as though the wall were the only thing keeping her upright. Her face had gone the color of old paper. Her other hand was pressed to her mouth. Carolyn. I crossed the foyer in 6 steps and took her by the arm. Her skin was cold through the fabric of her dress. What happened? Are you feeling sick? She looked at me, and her eyes were doing something I had not seen in 35 years of marriage. They were asking me a question she did not know how to say out loud. We need to go, she said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Right now, Warren, we need to leave right now. What are you talking about? The party just started. We can't just... Please. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist, and her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman whose hand would not stop shaking. Please, right now. I looked back toward the terrace where Garrett was still laughing at something one of his guests had said. His jacket perfectly pressed his glass, raised his whole life, gleaming under the string lights, like a photograph taken at exactly the right moment. Then I looked at my wife's face again. I went to find our jackets. The gravel crunched under our tires as we pulled away from Garrett's driveway, and the glow of the party disappeared behind the gate like a curtain being drawn. I had told Garrett we were not feeling well. He had frowned and started to protest, and I had watched Carolyn smile at him with every muscle in her face while the rest of her was somewhere far away. She had kissed his cheek. She had said the house was beautiful. She had walked to the car without looking back. I drove 3 blocks before I could not stand it anymore. Carolyn. I kept my eyes on the road, but reached across the console and touched her arm. Her skin was still cold. Talk to me. What is going on? She had both hands pressed flat against her thighs, fingers spread the way she did when she was trying to stop them from shaking. She was staring straight ahead at the dark road, her jaw tight, her breathing shallow and deliberate, like someone counting each breath to make sure it kept coming. Give me a minute, she said. You're scaring me. I know, give me a minute. I turned onto Gordon Drive and pulled into the parking lot of a closed flower shop cutting the engine. The streetlight overhead cast a pale yellow glow across the dashboard. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that Naples gets late on a Friday when the tourists are in the restaurants and the residents have gone to bed. I turned in my seat to face her. Carolyn, please. She turned to look at me, and what I saw in her face made my stomach drop. In 35 years of marriage, I had seen Carolyn frightened exactly twice, once when Paige had fallen off a horse at age 11, and once when her mother had called at midnight with bad news. This was a 3rd time. This looked worse than the other 2. I went upstairs, she said. Her voice came out thin and careful, like she was testing the weight of each word before she put it down. I was looking for the powder room. I went down the wrong hallway. Okay. The door to his office was open, not all the way, just a few inches, and I could see his desk. She stopped. Her throat moved as she swallowed. There was a folder on the desk, a thick one with a label on the tab. It said, Apex Horizon Active Client Portfolio, Q 12025. That's his company, I said. That's not unusual for someone who works from Warren. The way she said my name stopped me cold. She opened her purse and took out her phone with hands that were visibly trembling, now the phone rattling softly against her rings. I took a picture, because something felt wrong, and I did not know why, and I needed to be able to look at it again. She turned the screen toward me. Look at the second page. I took the phone from her. The image was slightly blurry at the edges, taken quickly at an angle the way you photograph something when you are afraid of being caught. But the center of the image was clear enough. It was a client list. Names in one column, ages in another, investment amounts in a third. I scrolled through the names with my thumb. Dorothy Winslow, age 74. Margaret and Eugene Phelps, ages 71 and 73. Chester Braddock, age 68. United States Army, retired. Lorraine Beckett, age 71, widow. Every single name on the list belonged to someone over the age of 65. Every single investment amount was in six figures. Keep scrolling, Carolyn said. Her voice cracked on the second word. I kept scrolling. And then I stopped. The name was halfway down the third page, listed between a retired schoolteacher from Bonita Springs and a widow from Marco Island. The letters seemed to rise off the screen toward me. Roland Chambers, age 64, U.S. Army, retired. Investment amount, $340,000. The phone felt suddenly very heavy in my hand. Roland Chambers had been my closest friend since 1984, when we had spent 8 weeks in the same barracks at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, eating bad food and complaining about the same sergeant and discovering that we had grown up 40 miles apart without ever meeting. We had stayed in touch through 2 deployments, through Roland's divorce and my wedding, through the years when life pulls men in different directions, and friendship becomes a matter of phone calls and the occasional dinner at the VFW Hall on Airport Road. 3 weeks ago, at that same VFW Hall, Roland had told me he had finally found a smart way to invest his retirement savings. He had been so proud. He had smiled the way men smile when they feel like they have finally figured something out. Warren. Her voice broke on my name, barely holding together. How did we not see this coming? The words hit me like something physical. I looked up from the phone. How long has that folder been on his desk? I asked. My own voice came out strange to me, flat and hollow, like a recording of itself. I don't know. How many pages were in it? At least 20. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her eyes were filling. Warren, those are all elderly people, retired people, widows, veterans, and Garrett's name is nowhere on that folder. But on the front page at the top, it says Senior Financial Advisor. She took a breath that shuddered going in. It says your name, the flower shop parking lot, the pale yellow streetlight, the sound of Carolyn breathing. I looked back down at the phone. At the top of the first page in clean professional type, it read, Apex Horizon Capital LLC, Senior Financial Advisor, Warren Holt, CPA. My name, my professional designation. My 35 years of reputation in this town, attached to a document I had never seen for clients I had never met, for a fund I had never reviewed. He used your name, Carolyn whispered. Her voice dissolved at the end, and she pressed both hands over her face, her shoulders beginning to shake. He used your name, Warren, to get those people to trust him. I reached over and put my arms around my wife. She leaned into me and cried the way adults cry when they do not want to, in short, desperate bursts, trying to hold it back and failing. I held her and stared over her shoulder at the dark street and thought about Roland Chambers sitting in the VFW hall 3 weeks ago, smiling that proud smile. I had no words, not yet. I had only the weight of what I was holding and the terrible dawning understanding that I had not yet seen the bottom of it. By the time we got home, Carolyn had stopped crying. That was almost worse. She moved through the house, quietly changed out of her blue dress, folded it over the back of the bedroom chair, with the careful precision of someone who needed to do something with their hands. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, her back straight staring at the wall. Then she said she was going to lie down, and I said that was a good idea, and neither of us believed a word of it. I went to the kitchen. The clock on the microwave read 11:47 when I sat down at the table. It read 2:13 when I was still sitting there, my coffee long, cold in front of me, the house breathing quietly around me, the way old houses do late at night. I had been going back through every conversation I could remember having with Roland over the past year. Every phone call, every dinner at the VFW hall, every time his name had come up. I kept landing on the same moment that evening 3 weeks ago, when Roland had leaned across the table with that particular expression he got when he felt he had finally gotten something right and said, "Warren, I think I found a real one this time. Smart guys running it, good track record. And they said you were personally involved in reviewing the portfolios." I had not been paying full attention. I had been watching the game on the television above the bar. I had said something like, "That sounds promising, Roland," and changed the subject, and Roland had smiled and ordered another beer. He had said my name was on the portfolio. I had not heard him say it. Or I had heard it and let it wash past me, the way you let things wash past you when you were tired and comfortable and not looking for trouble. My chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with my heart. I got up and opened my laptop on the kitchen counter, typing the name of Garrett's company into the search bar. Apex Horizon Capital, LLC. The website loaded immediately clean, white design, professional photography, the kind of site that costs real money to build. Photographs of a gleaming office, testimonials from satisfied clients. A biography page with a professional headshot of Garrett in a dark suit, smiling with the easy confidence of a man who has never doubted himself for a single morning. And there, listed beneath Garrett's name under the heading Advisory Board, was mine. Warren Holt, CPA, Senior Financial Advisor, 35 years of accounting experience in Southwest Florida. My hands gripped the edge of the counter. My knuckles went white against the granite. The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly the way rooms do when your body understands something before your mind catches up. I had never agreed to this. I had never been asked. I had never reviewed a single document for Apex Horizon Capital, never attended a meeting, never spoken to a client, never signed anything that would place my name on that website. I scrolled down to the testimonials. The third one stopped me cold. Roland C. U.S. Army, retired Naples, Florida. When I found out Warren Holt was personally overseeing the investment strategy, I knew my money was in good hands. Best financial decision of my life. A sound came out of me that I did not recognize, something between a groan and a sharp exhale forced up from somewhere in my chest. I pressed my fist against my mouth and stood there in my kitchen at 2 a.m, with the refrigerator humming and the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, and my son's company website glowing on the laptop screen, and I thought about 64-year-old Roland Chambers handing over $340,000 because he trusted my name. My name that I had spent 35 years building one honest return at a time. I called Roland. It was too late, far too late, but I called anyway, standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark yard. 4 rings, his voicemail, his voice on the recording, gruff and warm, the same voice that had talked me through 2 deployments and 1 very bad winter in 1987. I hung up without leaving a message. What would I have said? I heard Carolyn's footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her robe, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed, in a way that told me she had not come close to sleeping either. "You found the website?" she said, looking at the laptop. "Yes." She crossed the kitchen and stood beside me, looking at the screen. Her hand found my arm. Her fingers pressed in, not gently. "Warren." Her voice was rough and low. "How long do you think this has been going on?" "I don't know." "How much money are we talking about altogether? Not just Roland, all of them." "I don't know that either, not yet." She made a sound of frustration low in her throat. Not at me, I understood, but at the impossibility of standing in your own kitchen at 2 a.m, trying to measure the size of a disaster your child has made. Her eyes filled again, and she blinked hard, pressing her lips together, refusing to let it take her a second time tonight. "What do we do?" she asked. I closed the laptop. The kitchen went darker without the screen glow, just the small light over the stove. I looked at my wife's face, the face I had looked at every morning for 35 years, and I felt something harden in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter and more durable than anger. Something that felt like a decision forming before I had the words for it. "Tomorrow," I said. "First thing tomorrow." She nodded, her jaw tight, her chin lifted. That was Carolyn. Even now, even in this kitchen at 2 a.m, with her eyes raw and her hands unsteady, she lifted her chin. We had just turned to go back upstairs when my phone buzzed on the table. A text message from a number I did not recognize. 3 sentences, no greeting, no name at the bottom. "Mr. Holt, my name is Shelby Marsh. I work for your son. I think you need to know something, but not like this. Not tonight. Please don't call this number. I'll reach out again." I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the table and stood in my kitchen with my heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the small light over the stove, while upstairs my wife lay awake in the dark waiting for morning. Shelby Marsh. I did not know the name. I did not know what she knew, or how much of it, or what it would cost her to say it out loud. But something in those few careful sentences, the precision of them, the controlled fear underneath them, told me that whatever Carolyn and I had found tonight was only the edge of something much larger and much darker than a folder left open on a desk. I did not sleep, not 1 hour. Delnor Wiggins Pass. State Park sits at the western edge of Naples, where the land gives up trying to be land and surrenders itself to the Gulf of Mexico. I had been coming here since 1991, the year I moved my accounting practice down from Fort Myers and needed somewhere quiet to think. The parking lot opens onto a wide beach of pale sand, and in the early morning, before the tourists arrive with their coolers and their umbrellas, the place belongs entirely to the pelicans and the light. Roland Chambers was already sitting on the second bench from the parking lot when I pulled in at 6:30 that Sunday morning. He was a broad-shouldered man who had carried his military posture into his 60s, the way some veterans do, back straight, feet flat on the ground, hands resting on his knees. His hair had gone completely white in the last few years, cut close the way he had worn it since basic training. He was looking out at the water, and he did not turn around when he heard my footsteps on the path, but I saw his shoulders rise and then drop with a long, slow breath. "I figured it would be you," he said. I sat down beside him. The Gulf was flat and pale green that morning, the horizon barely distinguishable from the sky. A brown pelican dropped out of nowhere and hit the water 20 yards out with a sound like a small explosion, then rose again with something silver in its bill. "When did you get my voicemail?" I asked. "About 4 this morning." He turned to look at me then, and what I saw in his face made my throat tighten immediately. Roland Chambers had survived 2 combat deployments, a divorce, and the death of his only brother. He was not a man who showed pain easily, but his eyes that morning were the eyes of someone who had been awake all night with something he could not put down. I figured if Warren Holt was calling me at 2 in the morning, after not answering my messages for 3 weeks, something had gone wrong. "Roland," I stopped, started again. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning. How Garrett approached you, what he told you, what you signed. All of it." He looked back at the water. His jaw worked for a moment. Then he started talking. It had begun 8 months ago, he said, at a financial planning seminar held at the Hilton on 5th Avenue South. Garrett had been one of the presenters, polished articulate, full of specific numbers and confident projections. After the seminar, Garrett had approached Roland personally, had mentioned my name within the first 2 minutes, had said that his father, Warren Holt, the CPA, the man Roland had known for 40 years, had personally reviewed and approved the investment framework for Apex Horizon Capital, had said that Roland, as the son of a man his father respected deeply, would receive a preferential rate. Roland's voice stayed steady as he described signing the initial paperwork. $340,000. Every dollar of his military retirement savings accumulated over 30 years of service transferred into an Apex Horizon investment account in October of last year. For the first 4 months, the returns came in exactly as promised, he said. His voice dropped half a register. 11% quarterly. I started telling Chester about it. Chester Braddock, we served together at Bragg, you might remember him. I told him it was the smartest thing I had ever done with my money. I remember Chester. Quiet man built like a fireplace, had taken a piece of shrapnel in his left shoulder in 1991 that still set off metal detectors. And then February, like I said. And then February. Roland's hands, which had been resting calmly on his knees, slowly curled into fists. The returns stopped. Garrett told me it was a temporary liquidity adjustment. Technical language. I looked some of it up, and it sounded plausible enough that I talked myself into waiting. Then March came, and there was still nothing, and when I tried to call the office directly, I kept getting forwarded to a voicemail that nobody returned. He stopped talking. A wave came in and pulled back across the sand with a long hiss. And at Warren. His voice cracked on my name just slightly, just once, the way a strong man's voice cracks when he has held something too long, and his grip finally slips. "He told me you were involved. He looked me in the eye, and he used your name, and I believed him because you are the most honest man I have ever known in my life. 34,000 days I have known you, and you have never once given me a reason to doubt you." Something broke open in my chest. Not dramatically, no sudden flood of feeling, nothing that looked the way grief looks in the movies. Just a slow, deep crack running through something I had not known was load-bearing until it gave way. My eyes burned. I pressed my fingers against my mouth and breathed carefully through my nose and looked out at the gulf and let the burning happen. I trusted your name, Warren, Roland said. Not your son, your name. The pelican came back, landed on a piling 20 feet away, and folded its wings with the unhurried dignity of a creature that had no idea what was happening on the bench behind it. When I could speak again, I said, "How much does Chester know?" "Enough. He put in $180,000. His disability compensation from the VA, 30 years of it." Roland turned to look at me directly, and his eyes were red now. Not with tears exactly, but with the specific redness of a man who has been fighting tears for several hours. "There are others too. I don't know all the names, but I know Lorraine Beckett is in it. She came to the same seminar. I introduced her to Garrett myself." Lorraine Beckett. The name landed in my stomach like a stone dropped into still water. I stood up from the bench. My legs felt uncertain under me, the way legs feel after a long flight when the ground seems slightly wrong. I reached down and gripped Roland's hand with both of mine, the handshake we had used since Fort Bragg, the one that meant more than a handshake. "I am going to fix this," I said. My voice came out rough and low, and absolutely certain in the way that only the worst moments make you certain. "Whatever it takes, I am going to fix this." Roland looked up at me. His chin was trembling barely just enough. "How?" he asked. I did not have an answer for him yet, but I knew one thing with complete clarity as I walked back across that pale sand toward the parking lot. I needed Elliot. I needed him today. I needed him before another hour passed. I got in the car and drove. Elliot Marsh had been my attorney for 22 years, since the afternoon I sold my accounting practice, and needed someone to sit across a table from me and make sure I did not sign anything I would regret. His office was on the second floor of a building on Fifth Avenue South, above a wine shop that had been there as long as I could remember. The staircase creaked on the fourth step the way it always had. The reception area smelled of old paper and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Some things in Naples do not change, and I had always found that reassuring. His receptionist, a composed woman named Beverly, who had worked for Elliot for 15 years, and had heard everything twice, looked up when I came through the door. "Mr. Holt." She read my face in approximately 1 second. "I'll let him know you're here." Elliot came out of his office before she finished reaching for the phone. He was a compact, careful man of 55, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned long ago that urgency was best expressed quietly. He took one look at me, standing in his waiting room on a Sunday afternoon, in the same clothes I had been wearing the night before, and said without preamble, "Come in and close the door." I sat down across from his desk and told him everything. I did not summarize or soften any of it. I told him about the folder on Garrett's desk, about the client list, about Roland and Chester and Lorraine Beckett. I told him about the website about my name listed as senior financial advisor on an investment firm I had never worked for. I told him about Roland sitting on that bench at Delnor Wiggins that morning, his hands curled into fists, his voice cracking on my name. Elliot listened, the way good lawyers listen, completely still. No expression, a yellow legal pad in front of him, on which he wrote almost nothing. When I finished, he set his pen down and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked back at me. "All right," he said. "I need to tell you several things, and I need you to hear all of them before you respond. Go ahead." "The first thing is that what you have described, if it is accurate, constitutes multiple serious federal crimes." He held up one finger. "Securities fraud, under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1348. That is the deliberate deception of investors in connection with the purchase or sale of securities. Your son's company was selling investment products. If those products were fraudulent, that is a federal felony carrying up to 25 years in prison." A second finger. "Wire fraud, Section 1343 of the same title. Every email, every phone call, every electronic transfer used to advance the scheme constitutes a separate count of wire fraud. Each count carries up to 20 years. A third finger. Elder financial abuse under Florida Statute 825.103. Any person who knowingly obtains the funds of an elderly person defined in Florida as 65 or older through deception or misrepresentation faces enhanced criminal penalties under state law, in addition to federal exposure. I had known some of this already in the abstract way a CPA knows the edges of financial law. Hearing it laid out that precisely applied to my son's name felt like standing under cold water. "The second thing," Elliot continued, "is that you cannot investigate this yourself. I want to be very direct with you, Warren. If you start approaching witnesses, collecting documents, accessing financial records, or confronting anyone involved, you risk being charged with obstruction of justice or tampering with evidence. Both are federal crimes. Both would destroy any case against Garrett and potentially expose you to prosecution as well. He leaned forward slightly. You have to do this the right way. Whatever evidence comes to you voluntarily, things people choose to show you documents that are already in plain sight, that is legitimate. But you cannot go looking. What about my name on that website? That is identity fraud and unauthorized use of professional credentials. We will address that separately, but right now, the priority is the investor funds. He picked up his pen again. You mentioned a friend in federal law enforcement, Conrad Yates. We served together. He spent 30 years with the FBI. He retired 2 years ago, but he still has contacts in the white-collar crime division of the Miami field office. Elliot nodded slowly. If what you are describing is accurate, this needs to go to the FBI, not local law enforcement. Wire fraud and securities fraud involving multiple states and offshore accounts fall under federal jurisdiction. Conrad is the right channel. He paused. But before you contact him, we need something more concrete than a photograph of a client list. We need evidence of actual fraudulent transactions. I opened my mouth to respond, and at that precise moment, Elliot's computer chimed with an incoming email. He glanced at it, and something changed in his face, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. He read it twice. Then he turned the monitor so I could see the screen. The email was from an address I did not recognize, sent 40 minutes earlier. The subject line read, Urgent Apex Horizon. The body of the email was 4 sentences long. My name is Shelby Marsh. I am an employee of Apex Horizon Capital. I am contacting you because I found your name listed as Warren Holt's attorney of record in a county filing. I believe you and your client need to know that Vivian Holt signed a wire transfer authorization this morning for $2.1 million to an account at a bank in the Cayman Islands. The transfer is scheduled to execute within 72 hours. I stared at the screen. The number sat in the middle of that sentence like a stone through glass. $2.1 million, 72 hours. She is the same person who contacted you last night, Elliot said quietly. Yes. He took his glasses off his forehead and put them on and read the email a third time. When he looked up, his expression was the calmest I had ever seen it, which told me he understood exactly how serious this was. 72 hours, he said. I looked at the clock on his wall, 4:17 in the afternoon on a Sunday. And then we start tonight, I said. Elliot was already reaching for his phone. I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone completely cold. She had changed out of the clothes she had worn to Garrett's party, and her silver hair was loose around her shoulders, and she looked smaller than I had seen her look in a long time, the way people look when they have been carrying something alone for hours, and the weight of it has finally started to show in their posture. She looked up when I came through the door. Her eyes went straight to my face, reading it the way she had read my face for 35 years, and whatever she found there made her set the cup down carefully on the table. Sit down, Warren, she said. I need to tell you something. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Outside the Pelican Bay neighborhood was quiet in the Sunday evening dark. A neighbor's sprinkler system kicked on somewhere down the street, a small, ordinary sound that felt surreal against everything else. I signed something, Carolyn said. Her voice was steady in the deliberate way that voices are steady when their owner is working very hard to keep them that way. 8 months ago, Garrett came to the house on a Tuesday afternoon while you were at your golf game. He had a folder of documents with him, and he was in a good mood the way he gets when he wants something and thinks he is about to get it. I did not say anything. I watched her face. He said he wanted to set up a surprise for your birthday. An investment account in your name as a gift, something he had been planning for months. She pressed her lips together. He had a stack of papers, and he said most of it was just standard financial authorization forms. He walked me through them quickly here, sign this one initial, here, date there. I asked him what each one was, and he explained them all. Except one. What was the one he did not explain? Carolyn's hands came up and pressed flat against her cheeks, her fingers trembling visibly now against her skin. Her eyes filled, and she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall yet. I found it last night after we got home, she said. I went through my files looking for anything with Garrett's name on it, anything I had ever signed, and I found a copy I had made without thinking the way I always make copies of everything, because your father taught me to. Her voice cracked on the last sentence. Warren, it was a limited power of attorney. It authorized Garrett to execute financial transactions and sign investment documents on your behalf, as your designated representative. The kitchen felt very still. A limited power of attorney is a legal document that grants another person the authority to act in someone's name for specific financial purposes. It is a legitimate instrument used every day in estate planning and business dealings. In the wrong hands attached to a fraudulent investment scheme, it is the mechanism by which an innocent man's name and professional reputation can be used to authorize transactions he never approved, with clients he never met, for amounts he never agreed to. My son had walked into my kitchen 8 months ago and talked my wife into signing over my legal authority while I was playing golf. Carolyn! I stood up from my chair, and the movement was abrupt enough that she flinched slightly, her shoulders pulling in. I walked around the table and crouched down beside her chair so that my eyes were level with hers. I took both her hands in mine. They were ice cold and shaking. Look at me. Look. She looked at me. Her eyes were overflowing now, 2 tracks running silently down her cheeks, her jaw clenched tight. This is not your fault, I said. Do you hear me? This is not your fault. He is our son, and you trusted him, and he deliberately deceived you. That is on him, not on you, not for 1 second. A sound came out of her that was not quite a sob, and not quite a word, something from deeper down than either something that had been building since the parking lot of that flower shop the night before. She pressed her forehead against my shoulder, and her whole body shook with it, her fingers gripping my hands so hard I could feel every knuckle. I held on. I did not let go. When she finally pulled back and pressed her sleeve against her eyes, I straightened up and went to the counter and called Elliot. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting the call. There is a power of attorney, I said. Limited. Carolyn signed it 8 months ago. She did not know what it was. A pause. Do you have a copy? She does. Bring it to me tomorrow morning first thing. This is actually important, Warren. It tells us how he was executing transactions in your name without raising red flags at the brokerage level. It also means Carolyn needs independent legal representation. I can refer her to someone tonight if necessary. Another pause. She is not in criminal exposure here. Lack of informed consent and fraudulent inducement are strong defenses. But we need to document everything she remembers about that conversation. I thanked him and ended the call. Carolyn was watching me from the table, her hands wrapped around the cold cup. Again, her eyes still wet, but her chin lifted now. Elliot says you are not in any legal trouble, I said. He's going to help. She exhaled long and slow, like a breath she had been holding for 8 months. Warren. Her voice was hoarse and very quiet. What is going to happen to Garrett? Before I could answer, my phone rang on the counter. I looked at the screen, our daughter's name. Paige was 28 years old, the younger of our 2 children, a sharp and straight-speaking young woman who worked as a hospital administrator and had inherited her mother's habit of making copies of everything and her father's habit of noticing when numbers did not add up. She and Garrett had always been close in the complicated way that siblings are close when one of them is watching the other more carefully than the other realizes. I picked up. Paige. Dad. Her voice was tight and urgent the way it gets when she has been sitting on something for too long. I have been going through some boxes in my spare room. Things Vivian left at my place last Thanksgiving when they came for dinner. A box of her old files she said she would pick up and never did. A short breath. Dad, I found something. You need to come see it. Tonight if you can. I looked at Carolyn across the kitchen. She raised her eyebrows slightly, reading the tension in my posture the way she always did. I am on my way, I said. Paige met me at the door of her apartment on Goodlet Frank Road before I had finished climbing the stairs, holding a manila envelope against her chest, with both arms the way you hold something you are not sure whether to open or throw into the gulf. Her hair was pulled back, and she was wearing the oversized sweatshirt she had owned since college, which told me she had been home for hours working herself up to this phone call. Her jaw was set in the particular way that meant she had already made up her mind about something, and was waiting to see if I would agree. Come in, she said. I made coffee. You look like you need it. Her apartment was small and neat in the way that organized people keep small spaces. Everything in its place, a row of labeled binders on the shelf above her desk, a single plant on the windowsill that was actually alive. She had cleared her kitchen table and spread several documents across it, waited at the corners with her coffee mug and a stapler and 2 books. I sat down. She poured coffee without asking how I wanted it, because she had known for 28 years how I wanted it, and sat across from me. I want to show you something before I tell you what I think it means, she said. Because I need you to see it first and tell me I am not imagining things. She slid a document across the table toward me. It was a photocopy of an insurance contract yellowed slightly at the edges, the kind of paper that had been folded and unfolded many times. The name on the policy was Victoria Mercer. The address was in Savannah, Georgia. The date was 11 years ago. "Keep going," Page said. Behind the insurance contract was a letter on the letterhead of the Georgia Department of Insurance addressed to the same Victoria Mercer at the same Savannah address. The letter was formal and precise in the way that government correspondence is when it is describing something serious. It informed Ms. Mercer that her case had been referred to the Fraud Investigation Division following a complaint regarding a life insurance claim submitted in connection with the death of a policyholder identified as her business partner. The investigation had been opened. Ms. Mercer was advised to retain legal counsel. Behind that letter was a second one dated 4 months later. The investigation had been closed due to insufficient evidence. No charges had been filed. I set the letters down on the table. My hands were steady, but my chest was not. "Now look at this," Page said. She placed a single sheet beside the letters, a photocopy of a Florida driver's license application dated 8 years ago. The applicant had listed a previous legal name, Victoria Mercer, the new legal name being requested Vivienne Cross. 2 years after that, according to the marriage certificate Page placed beside the license application, Vivienne Cross had become Vivienne Holt. I sat back in my chair. The apartment was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside on Goodlet Frank Road, a car passed with its radio on something with a heavy bass line and then faded away. "She changed her name before she came to Florida," Page said. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were bright with anger. Not the hot, explosive anger of someone who has just been surprised, but the cold, focused anger of someone who has been suspicious for a long time and has just been proven right. She was investigated for insurance fraud in Georgia. The case was dropped, but the investigation happened, and then she became someone else and moved here and married my brother. "Does Garrett know?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Page pressed her fingers against the edge of the table. "I think he has known for a long time. I think she told him early on, maybe even before they got serious. And I think she made sure he understood that knowing made him responsible, that if he ever said anything, he was admitting he had helped cover it up." She looked at me steadily. She did not trap him with love, Dad. She trapped him with a secret. The understanding of it moved through me slowly, the way cold water rises. I thought about Garrett at that party 2 nights ago. The performance of it, the practiced confidence, the way he had moved through his own home, like an actor who had memorized every line but was still slightly afraid of forgetting one. I had read that as arrogance. Now I wondered how much of it had been fear dressed up in a linen jacket. "He could have come to me," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I know." Page's expression softened for just a moment, just long enough for me to see the grief underneath the anger. "But he was 28, and he was in love, and she had him convinced that going to anyone was the same as going to prison." She paused. "That does not make what he has done to those people acceptable. I want to be clear about that. Roland lost his retirement, Dad. Chester lost 30 years of disability payments. That is real, and it is not excusable." Her voice hardened again. "But I think Garrett is as much a prisoner in that house as anyone Vivienne has ever defrauded." I picked up the driver's license application and looked at the photograph. The woman in it was younger, her hair a different length, but the sharp green eyes were unmistakable. The eyes that had taken inventory of every room she entered. The eyes that had looked at me at that party 2 nights ago and registered me in approximately 4 seconds and moved on. I had thought she was remarkable. "I need to take these," I said. "I made copies," Page said immediately, which was so entirely her that despite everything I almost smiled. She slid a second envelope across the table. "Originals stay with me. You take the copies to whoever needs them." I stood up and put the envelope in my jacket pocket. My mind was already moving forward to Conrad, to the timeline, to the 72 hours that Elliot's clock was counting down. "Dad!" Page's voice stopped me at the door. I turned. She was still sitting at the table, her hands flat on the surface in front of her, her eyes wet now in a way she was working hard not to acknowledge. "Is there any version of this where Garrett comes out of it, okay?" I looked at my daughter for a long moment, at the set of her jaw and the brightness of her eyes and the way she was holding herself together with both hands. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to do everything I can to find out." I drove home through the Sunday night streets of Naples with the envelope on the passenger seat beside me and the weight of what I now knew pressing down on everything else. Vivienne Cross, Victoria Mercer. 2 names for one woman, and a closed investigation that had not stopped her, only relocated her. And Garrett, somewhere in the middle of all of it, trapped by a secret he had been carrying alone for years. I did not forgive him. Not yet. But I understood him finally in a way I had not that morning. Before I tell you what I decided to do next, comment the word "ready" below so I know you are still with me. Because what happened in the next 48 hours changed everything, and I want to make sure you are here for it. A gentle note: the story ahead contains some fictional elements crafted for depth and reflection. If that is not something you want to hear, this is a perfectly fine place to step away. No hard feelings at all. I had rehearsed it in the bathroom mirror that morning, which was not something I had done since the one time Carolyn had talked me into performing a reading at our church's Christmas program in 2009. The slight forward tilt of the shoulders, the half-second delay before answering, as though the words needed a moment to travel from somewhere further back in the mind. The expression of a man who is pleased with himself for remembering something useful. 60 years old is close enough to convincing if you commit to it. Elliot had spent Monday working through the legal architecture of what he called the controlled information operation. In plain language, it meant this: with Conrad's preliminary involvement and the FBI's informal awareness of the situation, Elliot had established a legitimate shell investment account under a fictional fund name, Hutchinson Gulf. Partners registered properly with the state of Florida, with Warren Holt listed as the account holder. The account held no real investor money. It existed solely as a destination. If Garrett chose to move funds into it, that movement would constitute wire fraud executed by Garrett himself on the record with full documentation. Every dollar that touched that account would be traceable evidence. In Florida, recording a conversation without all parties' knowledge is generally prohibited, but Elliot had explained one critical exception. Under Florida statute 934.032c, it is lawful for a person to record a conversation if they are a party to that conversation, and the purpose is to obtain evidence of a criminal act. Warren was a party to the lunch. The purpose was to document fraud. Elliot had confirmed it was legal. I had placed my phone in my shirt pocket that Tuesday morning with the recording application running before I left the house. Campiello on 5th Avenue South was warm at noon, the way good Italian restaurants are warm. Amber light, the smell of garlic and olive oil, the comfortable noise of a lunch crowd going about ordinary business. I arrived 12 minutes early and took a corner table with my back to the wall, which was a habit I had developed in the Army and never lost. Garrett came through the door at 12:02, spotted me immediately, and crossed the room with the long-strided confidence of a man who moved through the world as though it had been arranged for his convenience. He was wearing a pale blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and the kind of watch that costs more than most people's cars. He looked as he almost always looked, like everything was going exactly according to plan. He bent down and gripped my shoulder as he sat, the way younger men do with older fathers when they are feeling generous. "Dad, you look good. How's Mom?" "She's well," I said. "Tired. You know how she gets in the heat." He nodded, scanning the menu with the distracted efficiency of a man who already knew what he was going to order. We talked about nothing for a few minutes: the drive down from Pelican Bay, the construction on Airport Road, whether the Rays had any chance this season. I ate my soup. I let him order the branzino. I waited until he had taken his first bite and settled back in his chair with the particular relaxed confidence of a man who feels completely in control of his afternoon. Then I leaned forward, slightly dropped my voice to the register of a man sharing something he did not share easily, and said, "I want to ask your opinion on something. Financial. I have a situation I'm not sure how to handle." Garrett's eyes sharpened with interest. He set his fork down. "Of course. What's going on?" "Old Bob Hutchinson. You remember Bob from the Pelican Bay Golf Group? Heavyset fellow. Used to wear that terrible orange hat he called me last week. He's been involved with a private equity fund up in Sarasota for the past 3 years. Something to do with Gulf Coast commercial real estate and short-term bridge lending. He says the returns have been outstanding, 11–12% quarterly. I shook my head slowly as though the number both impressed and confused me. He wants me to put in $500,000, says there's a minimum for existing members introducing new capital. Garrett was very still now. Not the stillness of disinterest, the stillness of a predator that has heard something move in the grass. "What kind of fund structure?" he asked. His voice was careful and professional, but underneath it something had come alive that had not been alive 30 seconds ago. "Private placement," he said. "Limited partnership. Something about a Regulation D exemption from SEC registration." Bob explained it, but you know me. I never kept up with the security side of things. I rubbed the back of my neck with the mild bewilderment of a man encountering terminology slightly above his pay grade. He says the minimum is 500,000 and the window closes at the end of this month. Garrett picked up his fork again, set it down again. His eyes moved to the middle distance the way eyes do when a mind is running calculations. Dad. He leaned forward. I want to be honest with you. That structure you're describing, Regulation D private placement, high quarterly returns closing window, those are features I see a lot in my line of work. He paused, and for one fractured second, I thought he was going to warn me. I thought I was going to see something decent surface in him, some residual reflex of the boy I had raised. It's a very attractive structure. Bob has good instincts if he's been in it 3 years with consistent returns. What's the fund called? Not a warning, an endorsement. Something in my chest collapsed quietly, the way a wall collapses when the foundation beneath it has been gone for a long time, and the structure has simply been waiting for one more thing to lean against it. Hutchinson Gulf Partners, I said. I'd like to take a look at the prospectus if you can get Bob to send it. Garrett pulled out his phone and began typing a note to himself, his thumbs moving quickly. And Dad, if you're serious about moving on, just let me know before you do anything. I might be able to streamline the process. I have relationships with a few of the custodial banks that handle these placements. Could save you time. I looked at my son across the white tablecloth, at his hands moving over his phone screen, at the ease of him, the practiced fluency of it, the way he had just offered to help me invest $500,000 in a fund that he intended to steal from before the month was out. I'll get you the prospectus, I said. I drove home on US 41 with the windows down despite the heat. At the red light on the corner of US 41 and Golden Gate Parkway, I caught my own eyes in the rearview mirror. They looked older than I remembered. I reached into my shirt pocket and stopped the recording. My phone buzzed before I reached Pelican Bay. Elliot's name on the screen. He's already asking around about Hutchinson Gulf, Elliot said when I answered. One of Conrad's contacts flagged an inquiry through a custodial bank in Sarasota. He moved fast. A brief pause. Conrad needs to know tonight, Warren. We are running out of runway. I said I understood. I drove the rest of the way home without the radio on. Shelby Marsh worked the early shift at the Gordon Drive Coffee House on Wednesday mornings. I knew this because after her text message 4 nights ago and her email to Elliot the following afternoon, I had driven past the place twice, once in the evening and once at dawn, trying to decide whether approaching her directly was the right thing to do, or whether I was about to make everything worse. Elliot had been clear on the boundary. I could not solicit evidence. I could not pressure a witness. But if someone chose of their own free will to sit across a table from me and say what they knew, that was a different matter entirely. The distinction felt thin in the early morning dark of my car on Gordon Drive, but it was the distinction I had. The coffee house was a narrow storefront with 6 tables and a hand-painted sign above the door, the kind of place that had survived 20 years in Naples by being exactly what it was and nothing more. I went in at 7:15 and ordered a black coffee from the young man behind the counter and took the table nearest the window facing the door. Shelby came out of the back 10 minutes later, carrying a tray of pastries for the display case. She was 26 years old, slight and dark-haired, with the kind of careful posture that people develop when they have spent a long time trying not to take up too much space. She was wearing the coffeehouse apron over a gray blouse, and when she looked up from the display case and saw me sitting at the window table, the color left her face so completely and so quickly that the young man behind the counter took a step toward her. She recovered. She set the tray down. She told her colleague she was taking her break and came to my table and sat down across from me without being asked, which told me she had been expecting this moment and had decided at some point between her text message and this morning that she was going to see it through. "Mr. Holt," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands folded on the table in front of her were pressed together too tightly. "Thank you for sitting down," I said. "You did not have to." "I know." She looked out the window at Gordon Drive for a moment, at the morning traffic at the ordinary Wednesday world going about its business. Then she looked back at me. "How much do you know?" "Enough to understand what is happening, not enough to stop it before that wire transfer goes through." Something moved across her face, not quite relief, not quite fear, but the expression of someone who has been carrying a secret long enough that having another person acknowledge it out loud feels like putting down a very heavy bag. "I have worked for Apex Horizon for 14 months, she said. "I was hired as an executive assistant, which in practice meant I handled correspondence, prepared client documents, and managed the filing system for both the client accounts and the internal transaction records." She paused. 8 weeks ago, I was asked to prepare a batch of quarterly statements for a group of clients. The returns listed on those statements did not match the actual transaction records I had access to in the internal system. The numbers going out to clients were higher than the numbers actually being generated. You understood what that meant, I said. I have a finance degree from Florida Gulf Coast University, she said quietly. Yes, I understood what it meant. Did you say anything to Garrett? Her jaw tightened. I asked him about the discrepancy. He told me it was a rounding methodology difference between two reporting systems and that I should not worry about it. She exhaled slowly through her nose. That night, Vivian called me directly. On my personal cell phone, which I had never given her. She told me that employees who created unnecessary complications for the company tended to find the job market in Naples very difficult. A short, humorless breath. She knew where I lived. She mentioned my street by name. My hand tightened around my coffee cup, the heat of it pressed into my palm. That is when I made the backup, Shelby said. I stayed late 2 nights later and copied the entire transaction database onto an external drive. Every client account, every internal transfer, every wire instruction for the past 2 years. I did not know what I was going to do with it. I just knew that if something happened and I did not have it, I would never be able to prove what I had seen. She looked at me directly. I have been sleeping with it in my nightstand ever since. I'm Shelby. I leaned forward slightly. I want you to know something before we go any further. There is a federal program called the SEC Whistleblower Program, established under the Dodd-Frank Act. It provides legal protection to employees who report securities violations to the Securities and Exchange Commission or to federal law enforcement. You cannot be fired, demoted, or threatened for coming forward. And in cases involving significant fraud, whistleblowers are entitled to financial compensation, between 10 and 30% of any sanctions over $1 million collected by the government. I watched her face as I said it. You would not be doing this alone. Her eyes filled. She blinked rapidly and pressed her lips together and looked at the table, and for a moment I thought she was going to excuse herself and walk back behind the counter, and I would never see that drive. Her shoulders rose and fell with a breath that shook slightly going out. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron. The external drive was smaller than I expected, a flat black rectangle about the size of a matchbox, unremarkable in every way. She set it on the table between us and slid it toward me with 2 fingers, the way you slide something across a table when you are not quite ready to let go of it, but have decided to. Anyway, 2 years of records, she said. Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Every transaction, every client, every offshore transfer instruction. She finally let go of the drive. There is a folder labeled Internal Memos. Read those first. I picked it up and put it in my jacket pocket. It weighed almost nothing. It felt like the heaviest thing I had carried in years. What happens to me now? She asked. Elliot Marsh, my attorney, will contact you today. He will walk you through the whistleblower filing process and make sure you are protected before any of this becomes public. I stood up and pushed my chair back. You did the right thing, Shelby. I know it did not feel that way for 8 weeks, but you did. She nodded once her eyes still bright, her hands still pressed flat on the table. She did not look entirely convinced, but she looked like someone who had made a decision and intended to stand behind it. I walked out onto Gordon Drive into the Wednesday morning. Sunshine turned my collar up against the Gulf breeze and called Elliot before I reached my car. I have the drive, I said. A pause. Then, get to Lorraine Beckett this afternoon. We need her contract before Conrad will move. Lorraine Beckett lived in a cream-colored bungalow on Thomason Drive in East Naples, 12 minutes from the marina, where her husband had kept his boat for 31 years. I had looked up the address through the county property records, which was public information, and therefore something Elliot had not told me I could not do. The flower boxes under the front windows were empty. The welcome mat on the porch was faded to the point where the original pattern was no longer distinguishable. These were the details of a house that had gotten smaller after someone left it. I sat in my car at the curb for 2 full minutes before I got out. I had no script for this. There was no version of what I was about to do that was not at its core a 60-year-old man walking up to a 71-year-old widow's door to tell her that the money her late husband had spent 31 years helping her save was gone because my son had taken it. I got out of the car. She answered on the second knock. Lorraine Beckett was a small woman with white hair cut short and practical, the kind of face that had once been pretty in a specific open way, and had aged into something better, more particular, more earned. She was wearing a house dress and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she looked at me with the careful assessing expression of a woman who had learned to be cautious about strangers at the door. "Mrs. Beckett," I said, "my name is Warren Holt. I believe you may have done business with my son's company. I am very sorry to come without calling, and I completely understand if you would rather not speak with me, but I needed to come in person." Something shifted in her face when I said my name. Not anger. I had braced for anger and would have accepted it without argument. What I saw instead was something more complicated and harder to look at. A kind of exhausted recognition, as though she had been waiting for this conversation without knowing she was waiting for it. She opened the door wider and stepped back. The living room was small and tidy, with photographs arranged on every flat surface, a younger Lorraine and a broad-shouldered man with a sunburned face and a wide smile standing on various boats in various bodies of water over what appeared to be 3 decades. Frank Beckett, I understood. The same man in 30 years of photographs, getting a little heavier, a little grayer, always grinning the same grin. "Sit down, Mr. Holt," Lorraine said. She sat in the armchair across from the couch, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me steadily. "I imagine you have questions." "I have an apology first," I said. "Whatever you tell me, whatever happened, I want you to know that my name was used without my knowledge or my consent. I never reviewed any investment portfolios for Apex Horizon Capital. I never spoke to any clients. I never authorized anyone to use my name or my professional credentials in connection with that company." My voice roughened on the last sentence, and I let it roughen because smoothing it over would have been its own kind of dishonesty. "I am deeply, profoundly sorry that my name was part of what brought you to this." Lorraine looked at me for a long moment. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Her expression did not break. "Frank died in April of 2021, she said. "Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end." She said it the way people say things they have said many times, not without feeling, but with the particular economy of someone who has learned to carry the weight of it in a smaller space. He had a life insurance policy he had paid into for 28 years, $215,000. He used to say it was his gift to me that I would never have to worry. She paused. He also had his father's watch, which he sold when Garrett was a teenager to help us through a hard year. He always said the only thing he kept was his wedding ring, because some things are not for selling. I sat very still on her couch. Outside, a mockingbird was singing in the bottlebrush tree beside the porch, cycling through its repertoire with the tireless invention that mockingbirds have. "I invested the insurance money because I did not want to be a burden," Lorraine continued. "My daughter is in Atlanta. My son is in Seattle. They have their own lives and their own children. And I did not want to be the mother who called asking for help with the electric bill when she was 80. Her chin came up slightly. "The young man from Apex Horizon called me in September. He said Warren Holt had personally approved the investment strategy. I knew your name, Mr. Holt. Everyone on this side of Naples knows your name. You did my friend Dorothy Winslow's taxes for 15 years, and she never stopped talking about how honest you were. Something twisted in my chest so sharply that I had to breathe through it. The front door opened without a knock, and a heavy-set woman in her early 70s came in, carrying a casserole dish covered in foil, stopping dead when she saw me sitting on the couch. "Dolores," Lorraine said, with the patient tone of a woman accustomed to her neighbor's unannounced arrivals. "This is Warren Holt. He has come to speak with me about the investment." Dolores Marsh, no relation to Shelby, I would later learn, was Lorraine's next-door neighbor of 14 years. And the person who had attended the Apex Horizon seminar with Lorraine the previous September, and introduced her to Garrett Holt afterward. She stood in the doorway with the casserole dish in both hands, and her face crumpled like paper being crushed from the inside. "Oh, Lorraine," she said, her voice breaking completely. "Oh, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I thought it was legitimate. I thought because of Warren Holt's name, it was safe. I never would have introduced you if I had thought for one single second, Dolores," Lorraine's voice was firm and quiet. "Come and sit down. It is not your fault. We have had this conversation." Dolores sat on the far end of the couch and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed carefully, her eyes overflowing, despite her efforts to stop them. She had introduced her closest friend to the people who had stolen her security, and that fact was going to live in her for a long time, regardless of what I said. Lorraine stood up and went to the kitchen and came back with a manila folder. She held it out to me. "The contract," she said. "Frank always told me to keep my paperwork. I kept everything." Her hand was steady as she extended it. "If this helps you do whatever it is you are trying to do, Mr. Holt, then please take it." I took the folder. Inside was a signed investment contract on Apex Horizon Capital letterhead, witnessed and notarized with Lorraine's signature at the bottom, and the amount printed in clear type, $215,000. Frank Beckett's 28 years of payments, his gift to the woman he had decided not to leave alone. I stood up. My legs were not entirely steady under me, but I stood. I am going to do everything in my power to get this money back, I said. I cannot promise you a timeline. I cannot promise you a specific outcome. But I want you to know that this is the reason I am doing what I am doing, and I will not stop until it is done. Lorraine looked up at me. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were folded. She had the stillness of someone who had already survived the worst thing, and knew that stillness was how you did it. I believe you, she said simply. I drove away from Thomason Drive with the contract on the passenger seat beside the external drive from Shelby, and I thought about Frank Beckett's wedding ring and the mockingbird in the bottlebrush tree and the way Lorraine had said, I believe you with no qualifier, no hesitation, no condition attached. It was the most frightening thing anyone had said to me in years. The sun was sitting low over the Gulf when I pulled into Delnor Wiggins for the second time that week, painting the water in shades of copper and rose that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. I had been here 4 days ago at dawn with Roland. It felt like 4 months. Conrad Yates was already on the bench when I came down the path, the second bench from the parking lot, the same one Roland had occupied on Sunday morning, which struck me as the kind of coincidence that is not really a coincidence at all, but simply the way that certain places accumulate the weight of important conversations over time. He was a broad man of 61, with white hair cropped close and the particular stillness of someone who had spent 30 years in federal law enforcement, learning that patience was not a virtue, but a tool. He was heavier than I remembered from the last time I had seen him at a retirement dinner 2 years ago, and his hair had finished going white since then. But he sat the way he had always sat, feet flat back, straight hands resting on his thighs, eyes on the middle distance. He did not turn around when he heard my footsteps on the path. You look terrible, he said. It has been a difficult week, I said, and sat down beside him. We had met in the fall of 1984 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, assigned to adjacent bunks in the same barracks for 8 weeks of advanced training. Conrad had gone on to a career in the Army's Criminal Investigation Division before transitioning to the FBI's white-collar crime unit in the Miami field office, where he had spent the better part of 3 decades investigating financial fraud, securities, manipulation, and money laundering. He had retired 2 years ago, with the particular combination of exhaustion and restlessness that comes from spending a lifetime looking at the worst things people do to each other for money. He still had contacts throughout the Miami field office and the SEC's Atlanta regional office, and more importantly, he still had the instincts. I placed the external drive on the bench between us. Beside it, I put the copy of Lorraine's signed investment contract, the photographs of Vivian's Georgia documents that Paige had prepared, and a printed summary Elliot had prepared of the power of attorney situation with Carolyn. Conrad looked at the items on the bench the way a doctor looks at a set of symptoms, systematically without rushing, starting from the outside and working inward. He picked up the investment contract first and read it completely. Then the Georgia documents, then the summary. He turned the external drive over in his hand once and set it back down. He said nothing for a full minute. The Gulf moved in the way it moves at dusk, slower, darker, with less of the cheerful sparkle of midday, and more of the weight of all the water that lay beyond the horizon. Walk me through the timeline, he said finally. Everything. Start from the party on Friday night. I walked him through it, all of it from the moment Carolyn had appeared at the bottom of Garrett's staircase with her face the color of old paper, through Roland at this same bench on Sunday morning, through Elliot's office and the 72-hour warning, through Carolyn's kitchen confession, through Paige's apartment, and the Georgia files through the recording at Camp Bielo, through Shelby's coffee house, and the drive she had placed on the table with 2 fingers through Lorraine's living room, and Frank Beckett's 28 years of insurance payments. Conrad listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet again for a moment. Then he reached over and picked up the external drive a second time. This drive, he said, if it contains what the Marsh girl says, it contains 2 years of internal transaction records, offshore transfer instructions, client account data that is potentially the most significant single piece of evidence in this entire matter. He set it down. I am going to need to get this to the forensic accounting team at the Miami field office tonight. They can begin authentication and extraction immediately. He paused. Shelby Marsh needs to be formally interviewed as a cooperating witness, Has she been in contact with Elliot Seabowl? It mean Westeråstbunderi. He called her this afternoon. Good. She needs to stay away from the Apex Horizon offices as of today. She should not return for any reason. He picked up the Georgia documents. The Vivian Cross situation is significant. A prior fraud investigation, even one that was closed without charges, establishes pattern of conduct. Federal prosecutors will use that to argue she has a history of this behavior and that the Naples operation was not an isolated incident. He tapped the documents against his knee. That substantially increases her criminal exposure. What about the wire transfer? The $2.1 million to the Cayman Islands? Conrad turned to look at me directly for the first time since I had sat down. His eyes were the same pale gray they had always been, the color of Gulf water on an overcast morning, and they held the expression of a man who had delivered a great deal of difficult news over the course of a career and had never found an easy way to do it. The transfer has not executed yet, he said. We have a window, but warrant to make an arrest that will hold to ensure that the charges cannot be dismissed on procedural grounds. I need one more thing. He leaned forward slightly. I need Garrett to move money himself into the Hutchinson account, on the record with full electronic documentation of the transfer instruction originating from his device or his authorization. He held up a hand before I could speak. What you have here is strong. The drive, the contract, the Georgia files you're recording from Tuesday, this is a serious evidentiary package. But the wire fraud count, the count that puts him in a federal prison rather than a minimum security facility, requires documented proof of him personally executing a fraudulent wire transfer. The Hutchinson account gives us that. If he moves money into it, we have him on the specific act, not just the pattern. I looked out at the copper water. A brown pelican came in, low off the Gulf, and landed on a piling at the end of the nearby dock, folding its wings with that particular unhurried authority that pelicans have, as though the world could wait. He will move it, I said. He called me yesterday asking to accelerate the timeline. He wants to get into that account before the end of the week. Conrad picked up the external drive and the Georgia documents and put them in the inside pocket of his jacket. He stood up, straightening his cuffs with the small, precise gesture of a man returning to work after a brief interruption. Friday night, he said. If he moves the money by Thursday, we act Friday. I will have Agent Marcus Webb coordinate the field team. Webb is the lead agent on financial crimes in the Naples satellite office. He has been building cases like this for 12 years, and he knows how to execute a clean arrest in a public setting without incident. He held out his hand. I stood and took it. The same handshake as always, firm and brief, the handshake of two men who did not need to say the things the handshake was saying. Warren. His voice dropped slightly. Whatever happens after Friday with the trial with Garrett, that is going to be a long road. You understand that. I understand it. He held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned and walked back up the path toward the parking lot, his footsteps steady on the crushed shell surface, the last light of the day moving across his white hair. I sat back down on the bench. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Garrett's name on the screen. I answered. Dad. His voice was brisk and bright, the performance already running. Listen, I have been looking at the Hutchinson numbers, and I think we should move faster than we discussed. Can we talk tomorrow about accelerating the transfer? I want to get you positioned before the window closes. I looked out at the Gulf. The Pelican had not moved from its piling. The copper light was fading to gray. Of course, son, I said. Let us talk tomorrow. I ended the call. The bench was empty beside me where Conrad had been sitting. The Gulf moved in the dark. I did not go to bed that night. I sat in my study with the desk lamp off and the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, the room lit only by the pale glow coming through the window from the streetlight outside. Carolyn had come to the doorway at 11 and looked at me for a moment without speaking, and I had told her to get some rest, and she had gone because she understood the way. She had always understood when there were things I needed to do alone. The study was a small room at the back of the house that had been a guest bedroom until the children left, and I filled it with filing cabinets and a desk and the bookshelves that had been crowding the hallway for a decade. It smelled of old paper and the particular dry neutrality of a room where nothing dramatic had ever happened. I had always liked that about it. Tonight, the ordinariness of it felt like a reproach. My phone lay face up on the desk in front of me. I had set it there at 9:30 when I got home, and I had been watching it the way you watch something you are not sure whether you want to ring or not. At 11:47, it buzzed. A text from Conrad. 2 words. It is moving. I picked up the phone and held it and put it back down, and stood up from the desk and walked to the window and stood there looking out at the dark street. A car passed, headlights sweeping across the neighbor's hedge, then gone. The street went back to its nighttime quiet. The sprinkler system on the corner lot ticked on and ran through its cycle and ticked off. I went back to the desk and sat down. At 12:23 in the morning, the phone buzzed again. Conrad, 1.8 million, confirmed. Webb has full documentation of the transfer instruction. Origin device confirmed as Garrett's registered business phone. Hutchinson Gulf account received the funds at 12:19. Do not contact Garrett. I read the message 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the desk and pressed both palms flat against the surface and looked at the grain of the wood and breathed. $1.8 million. Moved in the middle of the night by my son from an account that contained other people's retirement savings, their disability payments, their late husband's life insurance policies, into a shell account that existed for the sole purpose of catching him doing exactly what he had just done. The trap had closed. I had known it was coming. I had built it myself carefully and deliberately with Elliot and Conrad and the quiet cooperation of a frightened 26-year-old woman who had kept a hard drive in her nightstand for 8 weeks waiting to do the right thing. I had wanted this. I had worked toward it every day for a week. It did not feel the way I had expected it to feel. What it felt like was a door closing in a part of the house you could not get back to. I sat in my study until 2 in the morning. Then I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I did not drink and stood at the window watching the dark yard thinking about a boy of 8 years old who had looked up at me from the Little League dugout after his first strikeout, trying very hard not to cry, and how I had told him that the at-bat was over but the game was not, and how he had nodded with tremendous seriousness and gone back out there and hit a double in the 5th inning and been so proud of himself that he could barely sit still in the car on the way home. At 6:45 in the morning, while the coffee went cold on the counter and the sky outside began to lighten toward gray, my phone rang. Garrett. I answered on the second ring. Dad? His voice was bright and quick the way it got when he was running on adrenaline and did not want anyone to notice. Good news on the Hutchinson front. I was able to move some liquidity around last night and get us positioned in the account. We should be seeing preliminary confirmation by end of business today. He was telling me he had stolen from his own scheme to feed my trap. He was telling me this cheerfully in the voice of a man delivering excellent news because he believed he was the smartest person in the room, and the room was very large. That is wonderful, Garrett, I said. My voice came out level and warm. I was mildly horrified by how easily it came. You work fast. That is what I do. A brief laugh. Listen, I am thinking we celebrate properly. I am going to put together a small dinner for Friday night. Campiello. I will get us the private dining room. Bring Mom. It will be good to have the family together. My hand tightened on the phone. Campiello. He was giving me the location himself. He was building the stage for his own final act without knowing it, with the particular theatrical instinct of a man who had always needed an audience. And Campiello sounds perfect, I said. We will be there. I ended the call and stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand and the gray morning light coming through the window and the cold coffee on the counter. And I thought about what Conrad needed to do before Friday night, and whether there was time, and what it would look like when it happened, and whether I would be able to hold myself together through all of it. Then my phone rang again. Not Conrad, not Elliot. Paige's name on the screen. I answered, and before I could speak, she said, Dad, I just got off the phone with Garrett. He called me out of nowhere, which he never does on a Thursday morning, and he sounded strange. Pressured. Like he was trying to sound normal, and it was costing him something. A breath. I am going over there. Paige, do not... But she had already ended the call. I stood in my kitchen with the dead phone in my hand and the cold coffee on the counter and the gray Thursday morning pressing against the window, and I understood that the next 24 hours were going to be the longest of my life. She called me back at 11:47 in the morning. I had been sitting in the driveway at Pelican Bay for the better part of 2 hours, keys in the ignition engine off, trying to decide whether to drive to Garrett's house myself or trust my daughter to handle what she had decided to walk into. The Thursday morning neighborhood moved around me in its ordinary way, a woman pushing a stroller past the mailboxes, a landscaping truck pulling away from the house 3 doors down, a mockingbird on the power line, going through its entire repertoire without stopping to consider whether anyone was listening. I had not moved the car. When Paige's name appeared on my screen, I answered before the first ring finished. Tell me, I said. She exhaled a long, controlled breath, the kind that follows something that has cost a great deal to hold together. I am in my car 2 blocks from their house. Give me a second. I waited. I heard her take another breath, steadier this time. Then she started talking. She had arrived at Garrett's house on Port Royal Drive at 9:15. Vivian's white SUV was gone from the driveway Garrett had told her the previous night in that strange pressured phone call that Vivian had a spa appointment until noon. Paige had gone to the front door, and Garrett had answered within 30 seconds, which told her he had been watching for her. He had looked, she said, like a man who had not slept. His shirt was wrinkled and his eyes were red at the rims, and he had the specific frantic energy of someone who has been alone with a bad decision for too many hours and is starting to understand its full dimensions. He had let her in without a word. They had sat in the kitchen, the same vast gleaming kitchen I had admired 4 nights ago, and Garrett had poured coffee with hands that were not entirely steady and set the mug in front of her without asking whether she wanted it. Garrett, Paige had said to him, keeping her voice as level as she could manage. I know what has been happening. Dad knows. The FBI knows. Not everything yet, but enough. She had leaned forward across the island counter. If you go to the U.S. Attorney's Office voluntarily today and offer to cooperate fully, your attorney can negotiate a cooperation agreement before charges are formally filed. That changes everything about your exposure. It changes the charges, the sentencing range, the facility. Everything. Her voice had dropped. But you have to do it today, not Friday. Today. Because after tonight there is no version of this where you get to walk in. They come for you. Garrett had set his mug down. He had stared at the counter surface for a long time, and Paige had watched his face go through something she described to me as the expression of a man standing at a door he has been afraid to open for years, reaching for the handle and almost gripping it. She will destroy everything, he had said. His voice had come out raw and low, the voice of someone who had been talking himself out of this moment for a very long time. If I go in, she goes in, and if she goes in angry, she will take everything down with her. She has documentation that could implicate people I care about. He had looked at Paige directly. People like you. Like Mom. Paige's jaw had tightened. Garrett, I know about Georgia. I know about Victoria Mercer. Dad has the documents. Whatever she thinks she is holding over the family, it is already in the right hands. She had pressed her palms flat on the counter the way she did when she needed to hold something steady from the outside, because the inside was not cooperating. She does not have as much power as she has convinced you she does. She never did. Something had moved across Garrett's face then. Not relief exactly, something rawer than relief, something that looked like a man seeing daylight for the first time after a very long time underground. His chin had trembled. His eyes had gone bright and wet. He had opened his mouth. And then they had both heard the sound of a key in the front door. Vivian had come home 40 minutes early. She had walked into the kitchen and taken in the scene, Paige at the island, Garrett across from her, the untouched coffee, the particular quality of silence that follows an important conversation in approximately 3 seconds. Her green eyes had moved from Paige to Garrett and back to Paige, and her face had not changed at all. Not a flicker, not a degree of temperature. The face of a woman who had been in rooms like this before and knew exactly what they meant and had already decided what to do about them. She had set her handbag on the counter with the deliberate quiet of someone who wanted to demonstrate that nothing in the room alarmed her. Then she had looked at Garrett, just looked at him. No words, no gesture, just the look, the specific calibrated look that Paige described to me as the look of someone who owns something and was reminding it of that fact. Garrett had straightened up from the counter. The brightness had gone out of his eyes. His shoulders had settled back into the posture I had seen at that party a week ago, the practiced ease of a man performing confidence he did not feel. You should probably get going, Paige, he had said. His voice had come out flat and careful. I have calls this afternoon. Paige had stood up slowly. She had looked at her brother for a long moment at the set of his jaw, and the redness still around his eyes and the careful blankness of his expression. And she had felt, she told me, the specific grief of watching someone choose the cage they know over the door they are afraid of. She had picked up her purse. She had walked to the front door. At the threshold, she had turned back once, but Garrett was not looking at her. He was looking at Vivian, and Vivian was looking at something on her phone with the serene inattention of a woman who had already moved on to the next thing. Paige's voice on the phone was steady when she finished telling me all of this, but only just. The steadiness was costing her something I could hear in the spaces between her sentences. He was going to do it, Dad, she said. He was right there. And then she walked in, and it was like watching someone blow out a candle. A short, tight breath. He is not going to stop. Whatever chance he had to choose differently, it is gone now. Her voice hardened into something that sounded less like anger and more like grief that had nowhere left to go. Do what you have to do tonight. Please. I sat in my car in the Pelican Bay driveway with the phone pressed against my ear long after she had ended the call. The mockingbird on the power line was still going. The landscaping truck was long gone. The woman with the stroller had turned the corner and disappeared. Tonight, I thought. It ends tonight. Before I went inside, I made one more call. Howard answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the easy warmth of a man with nowhere pressing to be on a Friday evening. I told him Garrett was hosting a small celebratory dinner at Campiello and had asked me to extend a personal invitation. Howard said he would not miss it for the world. I started the engine and drove inside and went to find the jacket I intended to wear to Campiello. Before I tell you what happened that Friday night at Campiello, comment 14 below so I know you are still here, because everything we spent weeks building was about to come down in a single hour, and I do not want you to miss it. One reminder: some details in this story are fictional shaped to carry the lesson more clearly. What this story is trying to say, however, that part is completely worth staying for. I arrived at Campiello at 7:15 and asked for the corner table that Conrad had reserved 3 days ago under the name Hutchinson. The hostess, a young woman in a black dress, who had the practiced warmth of someone very good at her job, led me through the main dining room without a second glance, which was exactly what I needed. Campiello on a Friday evening in March was everything Naples does best when it is not thinking about it. Amber candlelight on white tablecloths, the low, confident hum of a room full of people who had nowhere they needed to be, the smell of good olive oil and wood-fired bread and something with lemon and capers coming from the kitchen. A piano playing something instrumental in the back corner, unhurried and unobtrusive. Carolyn and I had come here for our 10th anniversary and our 20th in the year. Paige graduated from college, and I had always loved the way the room made you feel like the evening was going to be long enough for everything you needed to say. Tonight I could not have said anything if my life depended on it. I sat with my back to the wall and ordered a sparkling water and checked my phone. A message from Conrad sent 40 minutes earlier. Webb and 2 agents in position in the parking structure on 3rd Street South. Entry on my signal. Arrest warrant signed by U.S. Magistrate Judge Patricia Holloway, Middle District of Florida, covering both Garrett Allen Holt and Vivienne Marie Holt, née Cross. Charges to be read on site. I put the phone in my jacket pocket and looked at the door. Howard Beale came in at 7:40, spotted me immediately, and crossed the room with the broad, comfortable stride of a man who had been told this was a celebration dinner and intended to celebrate. He was wearing a sport coat that was slightly too large for him, and carrying the good-natured enthusiasm of someone who genuinely liked Garrett and had no idea what the evening was going to become. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down and flagged the waiter with the ease of a man who had been coming to Campiello for years. "Warren," he clapped me on the arm. "Hell of a thing, isn't it, your boy throwing a dinner like this on a Friday? You raised him right." "Thank you, Howard," I said. He ordered a bourbon and started talking about the view from his back terrace and whether the canal needed dredging, and I said the appropriate things at the appropriate intervals and watched the door over his shoulder. Howard Beale was a decent man who had moved next door to my son by coincidence and been drawn into Garrett's orbit by proximity and goodwill, and the natural human tendency to like people who seemed successful. He did not know that the reason Conrad had suggested I invite him was that a disinterested civilian witness at the table would make the evening's events considerably cleaner from an evidentiary standpoint. I had not told him that. I did not intend to. Garrett and Vivienne came through the door at 8:02. He was wearing the dark suit he reserved for occasions he wanted to impress, and he moved through the room the way he always moved, with that long-strided room-reading confidence that I had once watched with pure pride and now watched with something that had no clean name. Vivienne was in black, her dark hair pinned up her posture, the posture of a woman who had decided years ago that every room she entered was hers, until proven otherwise. She was carrying a small evening bag and scanning the dining room with those green eyes that processed information the way a camera does quickly, completely without apparent emotion. They reached the table. Garrett bent down and gripped my shoulder. "Dad, you look good." He straightened and extended his hand to Howard. "Howard, glad you could make it. Sit down, everyone. This is going to be a good night." He meant it. That was the thing that struck me as I watched him settle into his chair and reach for the wine list. With the easy authority of a man in his own element, he genuinely meant it. Whatever calculations were running underneath the performance, whatever pressure he was managing from Vivienne's discovery of the missing funds and his midnight transfer, and the narrowing window of the scheme he had been running, none of it reached the surface. The surface was all warmth and occasion, and the particular brightness of a man who believed he had solved his problems. I looked at my son across the white tablecloth, and I felt something in my chest that I had not expected to feel at this moment. Not anger, not satisfaction, not the cold clarity of a man executing a necessary plan. I felt grief. Clean and total, the way grief is when it arrives without warning and you have no defenses prepared because you were concentrating on something else. He looked so much like the boy I had raised, the set of his jaw, the way his hands moved when he was talking, the brightness in his eyes when he thought he was winning. I had spent the last week thinking of him as the man he had become, the fraudulent, calculating, dangerous man who had used my name to steal from Roland and Lorraine and Chester and dozens of others. But sitting across from him at this table, watching him pour wine for Howard with a flourish, and ask the waiter about the Branzino special, I saw the boy underneath the man, with a clarity that was almost unbearable. I did not want to be here. I understood with complete certainty that I had no choice. Vivienne caught my eye across the table and smiled the precise social smile she used when she wanted to appear warm without the effort of actually being warm. I smiled back. My face did it on its own, 35 years of social training, overriding everything else. Garrett raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to family." Howard raised his glass with the enthusiasm of a man who liked toasts. I raised mine. Vivienne raised hers with the measured grace of a woman performing a ritual she found slightly beneath her. The glasses touched. I checked my watch under the table. 8:13. I looked at the door. At 8:17 it opened. Conrad came through first, wearing his dark jacket and the blue tie he had mentioned in his message as the identification signal for Webb's team. He was moving at the measured, unhurried pace of a man who had done this many times and understood that the manner of entry was itself a form of information. Behind him came Agent Marcus Webb, a lean, dark-haired man of 44 in a charcoal suit, with the focused, quiet authority of a federal agent who had learned that the less commotion and arrest generated, the more smoothly it concluded. Behind Webb came 2 more agents in plain clothes positioned to cover the room's secondary exits. The dining room did not register them immediately. That was the point. Vivienne registered them in approximately 4 seconds. I watched her face change. It was the only time in 2 years of knowing her that I saw Vivienne Holt lose control of her expression, just for a moment, just long enough to see what lived underneath the performance. Her green eyes went to Conrad, then to Webb, then to the agents at the exits, and then to me. And in the half second before she reassembled herself, her face held an expression I had not seen on her before. Something that looked for just that instant like fear. Webb was the first one I recognized clearly. The charcoal suit, the measured stride of a man who had done this before and intended to do it cleanly. Conrad followed 2 steps behind his dark jacket and blue tie, exactly as described. The dining room had not noticed them yet. I had. I set my water glass down and did not pick it up again. He crossed the dining room at a steady, unhurried pace, Webb and the 2 agents fanning out behind him with the quiet efficiency of people who had rehearsed this. The piano kept playing. The room kept talking. A waiter near the kitchen doors looked up, read something in the way the 4 men were moving, and went very still. Conrad stopped at our table. Agent Marcus Webb stepped forward, first badge visible at his breast pocket, his voice level and carrying across the quiet room. "Garrett Allen Holt, I am Special Agent Marcus Webb, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have a warrant for your arrest issued by the United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida. Please stand up slowly and keep your hands where I can see them." Conrad stood 2 steps behind Webb, his arms at his sides, watching the table with the stillness of a man who had earned the right to be in this room and needed nothing more from it. The dining room went silent, the way rooms go silent when something happens that no one has a script for, not all at once but in a spreading wave, table by table, conversation by conversation, until the only sound was the piano, which played 2 more bars before the pianist noticed and stopped. Garrett did not move for a full 3 seconds. He sat with his wineglass still raised slightly from the toast, his face cycling through expressions so quickly I could not name them individually: confusion, disbelief, calculation. And underneath all of it, the beginning of something that looked like the collapse of a structure that had been under pressure for a very long time. Then he stood up. His chair scraped back against the tile floor with a sound that seemed enormous in the silence. "This is a mistake," he said. His voice came out controlled, almost professional. "I want my attorney present before anyone says anything." "You have that right," Conrad said. "Agent Webb will advise you of your full rights momentarily." Webb stepped forward. In a clear, measured voice, he read, "Garrett his Miranda rights, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the right to have an attorney appointed if he could not afford one. The words that American law requires be spoken to every person placed under arrest. The words that draw the line between the world before and the world after. Vivienne had not stood up. She was sitting perfectly straight in her chair with her evening bag on the table in front of her, and her hands folded on top of it, and her face had returned to the composed, unreadable surface I had known for 2 years. She was already thinking I understood, already calculating, already several moves ahead of the moment everyone else was still absorbing. The second agent approached her, Ms. Vivienne Holt. He identified himself and began reading her rights in the same measured cadence. She looked at him with the polite attention of someone listening to directions they already knew. And then Garrett looked at me. I had known this moment was coming. I had tried to prepare for it the way you prepare for things you cannot actually prepare for, by thinking through it in advance, by telling yourself you are ready, by constructing in your mind a version of yourself who handles it with steadiness and composure. None of that preparation was adequate. His eyes found mine across the table, and the composure broke. Not gradually, all at once the way a pane of glass breaks there, and then not there. You, he said. His voice cracked on the single word, and then hardened into something that came from a place much deeper and angrier and more wounded than the controlled professional tone of 30 seconds ago. You did this. You set this up. The fun, the dinner, all of it, it was you. He took a step toward me, and Webb's hand came up immediately, not touching him, but present. Garrett's voice rose raw and ragged now, filling the silent room. Tell them, Dad. Tell them you were involved. Tell them the Hutchinson account was your idea. Tell them you knew what I was doing, and you approved it because you wanted a cut. Tell them. His voice had gone to a place I had not heard it go since he was 15 years old, and we had fought about something I no longer remembered, and he had stood in the kitchen doorway and shouted at me with everything he had because he was furious and frightened and did not know another way to be both at once. I reached into my jacket pocket. I took out my phone. I found the recording from Tuesday's lunch at this same restaurant, and I pressed play, and I set the phone on the white tablecloth between us. His own voice came out of the speaker, clear and unhesitating in the amber-lit dining room. I want to be honest with you. That structure you're describing, it's a very attractive structure. Bob has good instincts, if he's been in it 3 years, with consistent returns. And Dad, if you're serious about moving on, this let me know, before you do anything. I might be able to streamline the process. I have relationships with a few of the custodial banks that handle these placements. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in someone's water glass 2 tables away. I stopped the recording. Garrett's face went through something I did not have a word for. The anger drained out of it, and what replaced it was not calm. It was the specific devastating blankness of a man who has just heard the floor give way beneath him, and not yet processed what that means for the fall. Vivienne had not reacted. She was looking at a point on the far wall with the serene inattention of a woman waiting for a train. Webb nodded to the agent beside Garrett. The handcuffs came out standard issue, the click of the ratchet mechanism quiet and final in the still room. Garrett did not resist. He let his hands be guided behind his back with the slow underwater compliance of someone moving through a reality that had not yet become entirely real to him. Webb began walking him toward the door. At the threshold, Garrett stopped. The agent beside him paused, allowing it. Garrett turned and looked back across the dining room. The room was full of people who did not know where to put their eyes. Howard Beale among them, his bourbon untouched, his large hands flat on the tablecloth. Vivienne being escorted toward the side exit by the second agent, her evening bag still looped over one wrist, her chin lifted. And me standing at the corner table with my phone in my hand and the remains of a dinner no one had eaten. Garrett looked at me, not with anger this time, not with the wounded ferocity of a moment ago. He looked at me with an expression I did not know how to read in the moment and have thought about many times since. Something in it was exhausted. Something in it was ashamed. And somewhere underneath both of those things, in a place I almost missed because I was not expecting to find it there, something that looked very slightly like relief. He held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then Webb touched his arm gently, and Garrett turned away and walked through the door, and the Naples evening closed around him like water over a stone. I sat back down at the table because my legs had decided they were done holding me up. Howard said something. I heard his voice, but not the words. The piano somewhere began to play again. A waiter appeared at my elbow with a bottle of still water and poured it without being asked, the professional reflex of someone trained to do something useful when useful things were hard to identify. I picked up my phone from the tablecloth and put it back in my jacket pocket. Then I sat in Campiello with the candles burning down and the room slowly carefully returning to its ordinary noise around me, and the only thing I could think was that I had to call Carolyn. The Naples Daily News ran the story at 6:03 Saturday morning. Carolyn was already at the kitchen table with her phone when I came downstairs at 6:15, reading it the way you read something you already know is true, but spent a long time hoping was not. She looked up. Her face was not the face of a woman who had slept. "Nora wrote it," she said, setting the phone face down on the table. "It is accurate." I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. Outside the Pelican Bay neighborhood ran its ordinary Saturday machinery, sprinklers, a dog being walked a lawnmower 2 streets over. The completely normal sounds of a neighborhood that did not yet know what had happened the night before. "Now, how are you feeling?" I asked. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Her jaw worked slightly the way it did when thoughts were not yet ready to be words. "I do not know," she said. "I feel like I should feel something specific and I cannot settle on what it is." "I think that is honest," I said. Her eyes filled not a flood, but the quiet overflow of someone who has held a tide back for a long time and has finally decided to let it come. She did not wipe her cheeks immediately. "He is still our son," she said. "Whatever he did. I am allowed to love him and be destroyed by what he did and want him to face consequences all at the same time." I reached across and covered her hand with mine. She gripped it hard. Paige arrived at 7:30, letting herself in with the key she had kept since college. She came straight to the kitchen, crouched beside Carolyn's chair, and put her arms around her mother's shoulders. Carolyn pressed her forehead against her daughter's and made a sound that had been building for 8 days, low and broken and deeply private. I put my hand on Paige's back, and the 3 of us stayed like that until Carolyn straightened and pressed her sleeve against her eyes. "What happens now?" Paige asked, pouring herself coffee. Arraignment, Monday morning, Fort Myers Federal Courthouse. Garrett enters a plea. His attorney argues for bail, though. With an offshore account on record, I would not count on it being granted. "What about his lawyer?" Paige asked. The court froze every account tied to Apex Horizon the night of the arrest. He cannot afford private counsel. The federal court will appoint a public defender, a man named Patrick Delaney. Elliot says he is competent. I paused. Vivian has said nothing since Webb finished reading her rights. That is her right. Howard knocked at the back door at 8:15, holding a white bakery box with the helpless, genuine expression of a man who wanted to do something useful and could find nothing useful to do. He set it on the counter and shook my hand for a long time without speaking. Roland called at 9:22. "I just needed a call," he said, his voice rough and quiet. "You did not have to make it right, but you did." I gripped the porch railing and breathed carefully. "You would have done the same," I said. When I came back inside, Carolyn was laughing at something Howard had said, a real laugh, unguarded and sudden. Then the phone rang, a young man's voice, formal and careful. "Mr. Holt, this is Patrick Delaney, Federal Public Defender. Your son is asking if you would be willing to visit. He says he has something he needs to say before any of this goes further." I looked at Carolyn. She had heard enough to understand. "Tell him yes," I said. "Tell him I will come." The Collier County Jail on Stockade Road smells like industrial cleaner and recycled air, the particular institutional smell of a place designed to be functional rather than humane. I arrived at 9:15 on a Wednesday morning, emptied my pockets into a plastic tray, and followed a corrections officer through 2 security doors into a visiting room with bolted tables and fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency designed to outlast your patience. I had not seen Garrett since the night at Campiello 5 days earlier. He came through the far door at 9:20. Gray facility clothes, unshaved jaw, dark hair uncombed. Without the expensive watch and the confident stride, he looked younger than 33. He sat across from me, placed both hands flat on the table, and looked at them for a long moment before he looked up. "I did not think you would come," he said. "I told your attorney I would," I said. "I keep my word." That landed. His jaw tightened and his eyes dropped briefly before coming back to mine. "I need to say something before you do." His voice was steady in the careful way of a man managing something large and close. 3 years ago, I still could have walked away. The damage was reversible. I chose not to walk away, and I am not going to blame Vivian for everything, because that would be another lie. He pressed his hands harder against the table. But I need you to understand what it meant to be 29 years old and have someone tell you quietly over dinner, very quietly, that she knew about a mistake you made at 24, and that the only path forward was through her. His voice dropped. I was a coward. I chose the path that cost other people instead of the path that cost me. I let him finish. I had promised to do that. When he stopped, the light hummed above us. "Why did you stop the recording where you stopped it?" he asked. "At Campiello, you could have said more." "Because I needed them to hear your voice," I said. "Not mine. Your voice, so there was no version of events where the truth could be disputed. I played exactly what was necessary, nothing more." His shoulders gave way. His hands came up and covered his face, and a sound came out of him that I had not heard since he was a child, the sound of someone who has run out of the strength to hold himself together. I did not reach across the table. I stayed present and let him finish, because sometimes that is everything a father has left to offer. When he straightened up, voice hoarse, eyes swollen, he said, "Tell Mom, I am sorry. Not about the case. She will know what I mean." I stood. I picked up my visitor's pass. I looked at my son one last time, his gray shirt, his open hands, his red-rimmed eyes, and then I walked to the door. Behind me, barely above a whisper, he said it. "Dad, I am glad it was you." The drive down I-75 from Naples to Fort Myers takes 31 minutes on a clear morning. I had made it dozens of times: trade conventions, golf tournaments, a retirement dinner on Cleveland Avenue where nobody talked about their children doing anything wrong. I had never once made it for this. Carolyn did not speak until we reached the Caloosahatchee Bridge. She pressed her palm flat against the window glass, watching the water spread wide and silver beneath the sky. The bridge was long, and the river below it was moving slowly, the way rivers move on mornings that do not know they are supposed to feel different from any other. "I keep thinking I should have said something sooner," she said. "Not at the party, before, when I signed that paper and felt wrong about it and told myself I was being foolish." "You were not being foolish, you were being a mother." She pulled her hand back from the glass. "That is not the same as being right." She was correct. We both knew it, and knowing it together was the only thing we had to offer each other that morning. The Lee County Federal Courthouse on First Street was full in the particular way that difficult days fill rooms not with noise, but with the weight of people who have come somewhere they did not want to come, because the alternative was staying home and pretending. Paige sat 2 rows behind us and reached forward to squeeze Carolyn's shoulder without a word. Roland Chambers sat near the aisle back, straight hands on his knees, the posture of a man who had survived harder mornings than this one and intended to survive this one too. Beside him was Chester Braddock, 68 years old, Army veteran, $180,000 gone. He had driven up from Naples alone, which told me everything about the kind of man he was. Lorraine Beckett had taken a seat near the back with Dolores Marsh, who had driven her from East Naples and refused to let her come alone. I had not expected Lorraine to be here. When I caught her eye across the gallery, she gave me a single small nod. The nod of someone who had decided that bearing witness was the last thing she could do for Frank Beckett's 28 years of payments. Conrad Yates sat on the prosecution side, hands folded, watching the room the way men watch rooms when they have spent 30 years learning what to look for. Agent Marcus Webb stood near the side door, shoulders squared, the same composed stillness he had carried into Campiello 14 months earlier. Elliot Marsh was in the row directly behind the prosecution table, a yellow legal pad on his knee that he did not write on. Garrett was brought in at 9:12 in the gray suit Carolyn had arranged through Patrick Delaney 2 weeks earlier, when it had become clear that the facility clothes would not do for this. He had lost weight. His face was the face of a man who had spent 14 months learning the distance between the person he had shown the world and the person underneath, and who had somewhere in that distance finally stopped pretending the two were the same. He did not look at me when he came in. He looked at his hands and then at the floor, and then at Patrick Delaney beside him, and I understood that this was not avoidance. It was the specific discipline of a man trying very hard to hold himself together in a room full of people he had harmed. Vivian crossed the court, used her birth name, throughout which I had learned from Elliot was standard practice when a legal name change was part of the documented pattern of fraud entered from the adjacent door, without looking toward our row. Her attorney, a woman in a dark suit who had spent the preceding 14 months filing every available motion and finding none of them sufficient, sat very still beside her. Vivian's posture was what it had always been, composed exact the posture of a woman who had decided long ago that the world would read whatever she chose to show it. I looked at her for the last time, with the detached clarity of someone who had spent 14 months understanding her completely, and then I looked away. The Honorable Sandra Briggs read the sentences with the care of someone who understood that her words would follow everyone in the room for the rest of their lives and who intended them to be accurate rather than theatrical. Garrett Warren, Holt 2 counts, wire fraud, 1 count. Securities fraud, 1 count. Elder, financial abuse, full cooperation with federal investigators, thoroughly documented, 6 years 11 months, federal custody with good conduct credit, applicable under federal guidelines. Full restitution of $4.7 million to be distributed pro rata across all verified victims, with the first disbursement within 90 days of the judgment order. Garrett nodded once as if confirming something he had already made peace with and did not need to hear twice. His shoulders settled slightly, not with relief exactly, but with the specific quiet of a man for whom uncertainty has finally ended, even if what replaced it is hard. Vivian Cross, 4 counts, wire fraud, 2 counts, securities fraud, 1 count, elder financial abuse, 1 count, obstruction of justice. No cooperation offered at any stage of the proceedings. 17 years federal custody. Full restitution jointly and severally liable with co-defendant. The gallery did not erupt. It exhaled a long collective exhale, the sound of a room full of people releasing something they had been holding since a Friday night party on Port Royal Drive more than a year ago. On the courthouse steps, Roland took my hand in both of his. His grip was the same grip it had always been, the handshake from Fort Bragg, the one that meant more than a handshake. "It does not bring it back," he said, "but it counts for something that you stood where you stood." Chester said nothing. He looked at me in a way that said everything words would have crowded out the specific look of a man who has faced enough hard things in his life to know that some of them get faced honestly, and some of them do not, and that this one had. Lorraine held my hand for a moment at the bottom of the steps. She did not cry. She had not cried once in all the times I had spoken with her over the preceding year, and I had come to understand that this was not hardness, but something else, the particular composure of someone who has already done their grieving and decided that what comes after grief is simply living. "Frank would have been glad there were still people like you," she said. I did not know how to receive that. I thanked her and felt the weight of it settle somewhere deep and permanent, the way certain things settle when you understand they will not move again. Carolyn found me at the car. Paige stood beside her with her arm around her mother's shoulders, her jaw set and her eyes wet in the way they got when she was feeling something she had decided not to name out loud. The 3 of us stood in the courthouse parking lot for a moment, saying nothing. And then we got in the car and drove north on I-75, without the radio on, watching the Caloosahatchee fall behind us and the flat green expanse of South Florida open ahead, ordinary, enormous, entirely unchanged, the way the world continues after the things that alter you completely. I have carried this family story longer than I expected. There were signs I chose not to read, moments where I told myself a father's instinct was just anxiety. This family betrayal did not begin the night at Port Royal Drive. It began years earlier in small choices no one named out loud. My personal belief, as a man who carries his faith quietly, is that God does not ask us to be perfect fathers. He asks us to be honest ones. I was not honest with myself soon enough. So, if this family story reaches anyone sitting with an uneasy feeling they have been explaining away about a child, a partner, anyone, I would say, do not wait for certainty before you ask the hard question. Certainty arrives after the damage, not before. Do not be like me. Ask sooner. This family betrayal cost real people real money, real sleep, real grief. The only thing that made it survivable was choosing truth over comfort when it mattered most. If this family story stayed with you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe. There is more ahead, worth hearing. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. The stories that follow contain fictional elements built for honest reflection. If that is not what you came for, step away, find what serves you better, and take good care of yourself.